火あぶりの刑です。純子さんの顔はリンチで原型をとどめておらず、傷は可能して異臭を放っていた。
This time we're going to talk about one of the worst case that we have ever encountered. To give a content warning, the following includes discussion of rape, graphic human torture, such as breaking of bones, starvation, and murder. So viewer discretion is greatly advised. Also, this case is quite long and very stressing, so we tried our best to summarize it. So with all that being said, let's get right into the case.
Junko Furota was born on January 18, 1971 in Saitama, Japan. She is 16 years old, high school student in Misato. Junko Furota was a very nice student. She is active, she is humble, she is really respectful, and she also had an attractive appearance. Even though in her teenager age, she was very mature, and a lot of friends gave her label as the mom of the group. She also has prepared her future. She had a part-time job at a plastic molding factory, and she saved most of the salary from this job to fund a little graduation trip. And she also wants to go to the college after high school. Look how perfect she is. I think she is a center of attention, and also she had caught the eye of 18 Miyano.
Hiroshi Miyano was a high school dropout and was known for being trouble. He had anger issues at a very young age, and his parents thought that maybe entering him to judo would help him release his anger. But actually, this just made his anger even worse because now he has been told to deal with his anger through violence. Shortly after he dropped out of high school, he needed money. And how he would get his money is by robbing men on the street. Shortly after that, he joined the Yakuza gang. Hiroshi was at the lowest Yakuza level, which was called Chimpira, mostly consisted of theft and sexual assault. Within this Yakuza gang, Hiroshi had three close friends, 17-year-old Jo Ogura, 16-year-old Shinji Minato, and 17-year-old Yasushi Watanabe. And it was said that these four boys, just a couple of weeks before the incident with Junko, they had actually raped another girl, but they let her go after a couple of hours. So after this sexual assault on this woman, it was Hiroshi and Shinji that were trying to find their next victim.
On November 25th, 1998, Junko was on her bike riding to home from after school job, and Miyano was watching her. And he came a plan. He told one of his buddies, Shinji, to come out, kick her on her bike, and Miyano will come like a hero to save her. And ironically, the entire scenario happening. Miyano pretend like,
"Oh my god, are you alright, Junko?"
And he asks Junko,
"I will let you home. It's too dangerous. Walk alone at night."
and the poor Junko, she was thinking, she recognized Miyano from school, and she decided to trust him. And for a while, Junko get lost in their conversation, and Junko don't realize Miyano was led her to an abandoned warehouse. In an abandoned warehouse, you know what? Miyano start to rape her, and Miyano said If she doesn't do what he say, he will report it to the Yakuza, and Yakuza will come to her to kill her. Then afterward, Hiroshi led Junko to a nearby motel. She was raped again twice. Next day, on November 26, Hiroshi called his three friends from Yakuza. They are Jo, Shinji, and Yasushi. Miyano bring Junko meet the gang at the park. They found her address book and they know where she live. And then Hiroshi used that to threaten Junko that now they could easily go to her house and kill her family. So what can she do? She abides by everything. Junko was later taken to the Shinji house. This house basically like a hangout spot of the gang. At the time, Shinji lived with his parents.
So the parents know that Shinji is a member of the gang.
Then they make a scenario again. Junko has pretend that she is one of their girlfriend, but Shinji parent didn't ask anything.
That's such a most questionable things. I think Shinji family concerned, but they are too scared because their son is mafia yakuza.
So they put Junko at Shinji room, and that is where she stayed for the next day as a prison.
The very next day, on November 27th, Junko's parents started to get very worried because Junko never came home from work, so they called the police to fill a missing person report. Word spreads pretty fast about her disappearance. They start making up flyers and the police start organizing searches for Junko. When the boys saw that people were really looking for Junko, they got very scared that they were going to get arrested because they had Junko with them. The boys then basically told Junko to call her parents and tell them that she's okay and is currently staying with a friend, and to beg them to call off the search. They told her that if she didn't do this, then the Yakuza gang was gonna come for her and her family. She didn't know what to do. She was only 17 years old at that time. She was very vulnerable and she was in a hopeless position. So she did what they told her to. She called her parents, and after the call, her parents did indeed call off the search. And then, for the next 38 days in Shinji's house, Junko was repeatedly raped and tortured every single day. She was starved and she wasn't given any clothes, so she was naked the entire time. The boys would force Junko to sleep on the balcony some night in the freezing cold. They would also tie her wrist to the ceiling and use her as a punching bag. And then she was burnt with cigarettes, forced to dance to music while naked, and inserted many objects inside her like scissors, bottles, light bulbs, etc. They also, major trigger warning, they also tore off her left nipple with pliers. She was forced to drink her own urine, eat her own feces, and live cockroaches. There was one point where they even poured lighter fluid on her and lit her on fire, so she had third-degree burns all over her body. They lit fireworks in her ears, genitals, and mouth. She had heavy weights dropped on all parts of her body, including her fingers, stomachs, and legs, which led to breaking them. And those are just some of the things that they would do to her on an everyday basis, treating Junko as just a toy. All of this took place in Shinji's house, and Shinji's parents knew the entire thing. They knew that Junko was in there, but still didn't say a single word to anyone.
One day, the gang invited one of their friends named Koichi to come over to take a look what they do to Junko. Koichi feel like it was really wrong, but Koichi also can't do nothing because he was too scared. But by the entire thing, he couldn't stop thinking about how the state of that poor girl was. So he went to his brother to tell the whole story and immediately call the police. Tell about the captivity of Junko. The police, they go to the Shinji house, but when the police had asked them, the Shinji parents just completely lied and said that there was no one in there. They even offered the police to come inside and take a look, and the police trusts the statement that they leave without even looking or check single detail inside of the house without knowing Junko still inside the house. In December 1998, a couple weeks into Junko captivity, Junko get a chance to access a pawn while the boys were distracted. But before she was able to say anything to police, one of the boys caught her. And as punishment, the boys poured lighter fluid over her leg and set her on fire.
During her captivity towards the end, Junko was constantly pleading to the boys, asking them to just kill her, but the boys refused. Junko's body was so crippled to the point where it took her almost an hour to go upstairs just to the bathroom. Until later on, she completely lost all control of her bowel movements. She was also throwing up very often because her body was just in such a deteriorating state that every time she would eat or drink something, her body would immediately reject it, and the boys would just punish her for it. They also found out later on in Junko's remains that her brain size had decreased due to dehydration. So most likely throughout the end of her captivity, she wasn't even fully conscious the whole time. As her body started to decay, she started to have to smell. Her body started to have a smell in it. And the boys immediately lost interest, and so they kind of just pushed Junko off to the side.
January 4th, 1989, that is the day Junko and all of her pain. So in line of story, the gang was lost in a mahjong game. It's kindly like a solitaire game in Japan. They come with their anger and take all their frustration onto Junko. They smack her, put candle wax on her eyelids, and beaten her with iron barbel. She's bleeding, and the boys feel disgust, and they didn't want to get blood on themselves. But they don't stop. They tape plastic bag around their hand and continue to abuse Junko. They tortured Junko for 2 straight hours until Junko had passed away. Yeah, she's finally at peace. In that moment, the boys started to panic, and in the panic, they make a plan. They wrap her body in several blankets, then put her body in a travel bag. And then they put in a 55-gallon drum filled with wet concrete and dispose it.
January 23rd of 1989, Hiroshi and Joe were arrested and questioned for the rape of another 19-year-old girl that went to the police after getting raped by the two. During their interrogation, there was also an unsolved double homicide in the town, and the police believed that the two boys were somehow involved. So they were kind of asking questions to the boys about the murder, but didn't specify what murder it was. And the boys thought that the police were asking them about Junko's murder. Hiroshi and Joe were in separate interrogation rooms, so when the police started questioning Hiroshi about a homicide, Hiroshi had assumed that Joe had maybe confessed to the murder of Junko. So Hiroshi just flat out confesses, and he told the police exactly where Junko's body was. The police hearing this were extremely surprised because they were not talking about Junko. They didn't know she was in danger. They later on find Junko's body in a concrete drum where the boys had put her, and they were unable to identify her just by her looks because her whole body was so unrecognizable, but they did manage to identify her through fingerprints. That same exact day, Hiroshi and Joe were both arrested, as well as Yasushi, Shinji, and Shinji's brother. Since at the time all the boys were under 18, their identities were anonymous from the public until later on a news outlet found out what the boys' names were and they released it to the public. Because they thought even though these kids were young, they had done such terrible and horrendous crime and they did not deserve any privacy.
Finally, in July 1990, all the boys were taken to trial. And it's just because they're underage and teenagers, their sentences extremely low. Hiroshi Miyano, the ringleader of the entire hell things, he only getting 17 years old in prison. Oh my god. I think that kid will spend his entire life in prison or get some death penalty. And do you know what? He tried to appeal his sentences, but thankfully the judge rejected it and gave his 20 years prison. Shinji and Hiroshi also tried to lesser their sentences, but the judge nope, you Shinji, you going up for 7 years prison, and you Hiroshi, you got 7 years in a cell jail. Joe Ogura was also sentenced to only 8 years in prison.
On April 2nd of 1999, there was a funeral held for Junko, and at Junko's school graduation, they gave the parents Junko high school diploma as well as having a moment of silence for her. Junko's job at the electronic retailer that she was supposed to have after high school actually gave Junko's family the uniform that she would have worn at her job with her name and everything on it. And they placed her uniform in the casket at her funeral.
By now, as of the time you're watching this video, after 30 years later, all of the guys are already out of jail. 2 of us has arrested back because another crime. Hiroshi Miyano rearrested for fraud, and Shinji recently arrested back for a murder.
The jerk always be a jerk.
That Joe's mother went to Junko's grave quite frequently and vandalized Junko's grave, saying that Junko had ruined her young boy's life. She would blame Junko for everything, even though they were the ones that were doing monstrous things to Junko. They had robbed a bright life of such a precious girl. And these boys, these monsters, get to roam on the streets and live amongst all the people and live their life. It's just very unfair and upsetting and sad to me.
Okay, so that's where the end of this story. This was such a heartbreaking sentences. The fact is, there are almost 100% that know about the Junko captivity, but nobody can or concerned to save her. She is Junko, such a kind girl. She is angel and was destined to do so many incredible things, but the world is too worse to her. There is a lot of documentary that making for memorizing Junko, like a manga, novel, and song. And we hope that Junko family trying to find a peace within all of this. And we also hope will not be other Junko story. And that is the end. Thank you for watching.